The lake was so still that night it looked more like a sheet of black glass than water. I sat on the roadside just beyond the guardrail, watching the moonlight scatter faint ripples across the surface. The air was cool, damp with fog, and carried that faint mineral scent that always rises from deep water. My car's headlights cut a pale beam into the mist, and for a moment I thought I was the only living thing out there. But then the shadows began to move. They stretched across the road, long and thin, cast from no figure I could see. At first I thought they were tricks of the headlights, bending against the fog. But as I shifted, they did not. They remained in place, tall, human-shaped outlines flickering silently at the roadside. My breath caught when one of them leaned, ever so slightly, as if it had noticed me watching. The lake stayed still. The road stayed silent. That's when I saw the shadow closest to me begin to step free of the ground. The road was empty. Late autumn fog curled around the guardrails, soft and damp. My tires whispered against wet asphalt. I hadn't seen another car for miles. Just the hum of my engine, and the faint smell of pine drifting through the cracked window. I slowed as the road curved. Something leaned against the metal rail. A figure, pale in the reflection of my headlights. I blinked. The shadow didn't move with the trees behind it. It just stood there. I squinted, tried to tell myself it was a trick, a tree branch, a pile of leaves. But the shape was too deliberate, too human. Then the headlights dimmed, just for a second, and when the light returned, it was closer, closer than it could have been. I could see the outline of a face, pale and still. The engine felt heavy. My hands tightened on the wheel, though I told myself to breathe. The fog pressed against the glass. I tried to remember the last curve, the last sign, the sound of tires over gravel. Nothing moved but that shadow, leaning, waiting, or maybe watching. I thought about stopping, turning around, but the road stretched empty behind me. Nothing but darkness, swallowing the line of headlights. The wind picked up rustling leaves against the guardrail. Or maybe something else. A whisper in the air. I could almost hear soft footsteps. Pausing, shifting. I swallowed hard. The shadow, it didn't breathe. No rise, no fall of the chest. Just a stillness that pressed against the car, the fog, the night itself. I tried to keep my eyes on the road. Every blink felt longer than the last. Each breath sounded too loud inside the car. Then the headlights flickered again. A sudden darkness for a heartbeat. When they returned, it was gone. The guardrail was empty. Nothing moved. The fog clung to the metal like a wet sheet. I kept driving. Slowly. The silence thick and heavy, like it wanted to follow me home. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even after the shadow disappeared, even as the road opened into empty fields. The memory of it clung to my skin, cold, immobile, unforgiving. I don't know if it moved or if I imagined closeness, but I know the heaviness lingered, in the seat beside me, on the air around me. For miles, I drove in quiet. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hum of tires, every breath reminded me it had been there, and I couldn't tell if it ever left. The night was damp. Moonlight pooled across the asphalt, pale and soft. A faint mist curled over the road, cold against my skin. I had been driving slowly. The tires whispered against wet patches. Every breath felt heavier than the last. Then I saw them, footprints, wet and glistening, crossing the road, perfectly spaced. Human, but not mine. I stopped the car. The hum of the engine shrank into silence. The fog pressed close, smelling of mud and pine. I stepped out, boots sinking slightly in the moisture. The footprints led toward the lake, smooth and shiny. Each one reflected the pale moonlight, like liquid silver. I crouched, fingers brushing the damp asphalt. The prints were cold, almost sticky. I couldn't tell if they were fresh or waiting. The air shifted, soft rustling along the trees, barely more than a breath. I could feel the fog wrapping around my arms. The prints ended at the water. Abruptly, no splash, no trail, just nothing. I leaned closer. The lake mirrored the moon, still and quiet. No ripples, no footprints in the sand. I could feel my heart in my throat. The hum of the night seemed louder. Every leaf brushing another sounded deliberate. I tried to reason it out. Rain? Mud from a hiker? But the edges of the prints were crisp, clean, too deliberate to vanish naturally. A cold wind drifted across the water. I smelled wet earth and something metallic. It carried with it a soft, dragging scent, like someone had moved slowly across the road. I stood frozen. The lake reflected nothing. The asphalt reflected nothing but the moonlight and the prints. A single bird called distant, and it sounded wrong. Echoing stretched, then silence. I wanted to follow them. Curiosity and fear tangled in my chest. But the lake, it stopped the path. No footprints continued into the water. No trail into the fog beyond. Just stillness. I ran my hand along the asphalt again. Cold, wet, and too real. I could feel the depth of the imprint, the shape of toes, the press of heels. I glanced back at the road. Empty. The mist curling along the trees made every shadow look like movement. I got back into the car. The door closed slowly, the hum of the engine returning. Yet I felt watched. The prints lingered in my mind. Every time I blinked, I saw them crossing the road, glistening, reaching toward the lake, then vanishing. I drove on, slowly. Every rustle, every shift of fog made me glance over my shoulder. The lake stayed quiet. The footprints stayed there in memory, glistening in the moonlight, where nothing should have left a mark. And I couldn't tell if anyone had been there, or if something had simply chosen to leave its trace for me alone. The road was quiet. Fog curled along the edges, soft and damp against the tires. The air smelled of wet leaves and something faintly metallic. It was late, the sky a muted gray, though the moon tried to shine through. Every breath felt heavy in my chest. Then I saw it, a faint orange glow ahead, flickering, like a candle struggling against a mist. I slowed. The hum of the engine softened. The fog wrapped around the headlights, bending the light into something almost alive. The glow wavered, dancing between the trees, warm and distant, yet strangely close. I stepped out. The cold air pressed against my skin. Fog curled around my ankles, damp and heavy. I moved toward it. The orange light flickered again, shyly. I could smell wet earth and smoke, faint and lingering. Every step made the gravel whisper underfoot. The fog muffled the world. Rustling leaves sounded like something shifting just beyond sight. The lantern flickered out, just like that. One moment glowing, the next nothing. Silence settled. Thick, humid, alive. And then slow footsteps. Soft, hesitant, from the fog. Around me, I froze. The breath left my lungs. The fog pressed closer, smelling of damp pine and cold mud. I thought about moving, walking back toward the road. But the steps, they shifted with me. Closer, pausing. A faint scrape over wet leaves. Then nothing. I blinked. The world seemed slower. My hands tingled from the cold. The fog smelled stronger here, almost choking. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, wind, animal, gravel settling. But the steps continued. I crouched listening. The mist wrapped my legs. The air was heavy with silence and something watching. The lantern never returned. Only the warmth of its memory in the air, and the footsteps soft, deliberate, surrounding. I backed away slowly. Each step careful, measured. The fog shifted, hiding shapes just out of reach. I could feel it then. Not the light, not the fog, but the presence. Pressing, waiting. I ran my hand across the damp guardrail. Cold, solid, grounding. The fog seemed to lean with me, smelling of wet soil and smoke. The footsteps faded. Or maybe I just stopped listening too hard. The lantern stayed gone. I stayed there a long while, listening to the hum of the night, the whisper of leaves, the shallow rhythm of my own breath. Finally, I got back in the car, door closing slowly, echoing slightly in the fog. The hum of the engine returned. The road stretched ahead, pale and empty. The orange light, just a memory. The footsteps, just a memory. But the feeling stayed. Heavy, quiet, pressing, as if the fog remembered it better than I did. And I drove on, slowly. Every glance in the rear-view mirror, every shift of fog, reminded me that some things move in silence. Things that don't need light. Things that wait. Patiently. The lake was still. Fog rolled off the water, soft and damp, touching the edges of the road. The air smelled of cold earth and wet pine. I was driving slowly, tires whispering against the asphalt. Every breath felt loud in the quiet of the car. The headlights caught ripples along the water, or maybe just shadows in the fog. I couldn't tell. Then I glanced at the passenger window. A face reflected back at me. Shadowed, pale, but unmistakably human. I jerked my eyes toward it. Nothing, just the fog curling outside. The reflection vanished as if it had never existed. I swallowed hard. The hum of the engine sounded hollow. The damp air pressed against my neck and cheeks. I kept driving. Slowly. The road curved along the lake, and the reflection came again. There, faint, watching. I blinked, and it was gone. The fog softened everything, but the memory of it pressed against my mind. My hands tightened on the wheel. The leather was cold beneath my fingers. Every rustle of leaves sounded deliberate. I tried to focus on the road, the hum of tires over asphalt, the smell of wet leaves carried in from the lake. But every glance toward the passenger side, every shadow felt alive. The window seemed closer than it was. The reflection, too still, too knowing. I could almost feel it breathing beside me. I thought about stopping, rolling down the window, but the air outside was heavy, thick with fog, and the reflection never returned. Only the sense of being watched. Quiet, unyielding, claustrophobic. I tried to imagine it was fatigue, a trick of light, but the memory of those eyes lingered, shadows curling in the glass. I drove on, slowly, the fog pressing against the headlights, the lake silent, waiting. The reflection didn't return. The car felt heavier. The seat beside me, too empty and yet too full. Every breath sounded loud inside the cabin. Every rustle of fog along the glass made me flinch. I kept driving, past the curves, past the trees shivering against the night. The lake stretched beside me, calm and quiet. The reflection gone, but the feeling stayed. I didn't look again. I couldn't. And the window, it waited, cold, still and patient, as if it remembered me better than I remember myself. The night pressed close. Fog curled along the edges of the road, soft and damp. The lake beside me was still, reflecting pale streaks of moonlight. I was driving slowly, tires whispering against the wet asphalt. Every breath felt loud, shallow, and cold. Then they appeared. Shadows stretching across the road. Slow, deliberate, walking into the fog. I froze for a moment. The hum of the engine felt distant. The fog smelled of wet pine and cold earth. They didn't run. They didn't hurry. Just glided across, faceless, silent. I wanted to move, to press the accelerator, but the car felt heavy, almost glued to the asphalt. The fog wrapped around me, smelling faintly metallic. I tried to count them. 3, 4, more? The shapes blurred as I blinked. I reached for the brights. A click. The orange and white beams cut through the fog. The road was empty. Nothing crossed. Nothing moved. I blinked, doubting my eyes. The fog shifted, rustling leaves along the roadside. My breath felt thick inside the cabin. The hum of the engine returned, but the memory of them lingered. Slow, quiet, deliberate. I looked into the fog again. Shadows pressed at the edges of vision. Or maybe it was the afterimage of what had passed. The air was thick with silence, heavy and oppressive. Every leaf brushing another sounded like a step. I wanted to convince myself it was imagination, a trick of headlights. Fog curling over the asphalt, but the weight of it stayed. The emptiness after them, the way the world felt hollow for a heartbeat. I drove on, slowly. Every curve felt longer than the last. Every rustle in the fog made me glance sideways. The shadows didn't return. The road remained pale and empty, but I could feel the memory of them, walking, waiting, watching. Even now, years later, I can feel their passage. Silent, slow, patient. The fog presses against the road. And sometimes, I swear I can hear soft footsteps just beyond the edge of the headlights. The bridge appeared out of the fog. Narrow, metal, suspended over the lake. The night was quiet, thick and damp. I drove slowly onto it, tires pressing against the wet metal. A hum began beneath me, low, almost alive. The fog curled around the guardrails, cold and heavy against my skin. Every breath felt thick, almost sticky. Beneath the bridge, the lake glowed faintly, soft orange-green light, as if something below was breathing. The water shimmered without movement, smooth like glass. The hum grew, not from the engine, not from the tires. The metal itself seemed to vibrate, resonating with the fog. I leaned slightly forward. The air smelled of wet iron and cold water, a faint metallic tang that made my teeth ache. The glow beneath me pulsed softly, irregular like a heartbeat. I couldn't tell if it was the water or something else, something watching. I tried to focus on the road, but the fog pressed against my headlights, folding the light back in strange patterns. Every shadow along the railing seemed to shift closer. The hum, it felt alive, warm and cold at the same time, resonating in my chest, in the soles of my feet. I glanced down. The lake's surface rippled faintly, though there was no wind. The glow deepened, reaching edges I didn't expect. I wanted to move faster, but the metal bridge held me, humming beneath my tires, a low, constant vibration that pressed against my spine. I could smell the lake more clearly now, wet mud, decaying leaves, and that faint metallic tang. Every inhale was thick with it. The fog shifted around the bridge. Thicker here, thinner there. Shadows leaned closer, touching the edges of the headlights. I blinked. The glow flickered beneath the water. It wasn't reflection. It wasn't moonlight. Something beneath moved. Slow, gentle, almost deliberate. I pressed my hands to the wheel. The hum vibrated into my fingertips. The glow pulsed beneath me, echoing that rhythm. I wanted to step out, but the night held me still. Cold metal under my boots. Fog wrapped around my legs like water. Every curve of the bridge felt infinite. Every inch of asphalt hummed. The glow beneath never left. Always just there, waiting. I drove on, slowly, listening to the hum, feeling the vibrations through the car, feeling the fog pressing tighter. The bridge ended eventually. The hum faded. The glow vanished beneath the lake, leaving only black water and fog. But the memory stayed, the vibration in my chest, the smell of iron and wet leaves, the quiet awareness that something beneath had been alive, watching, patient. Even now, I can feel it. Every hum, every faint glow, it lingers in the quiet corners of my mind, waiting. The road curved quietly. Fog lingered low, clinging to the asphalt like a damp sheet. The air smelled of wet pine and earth, sharp and heavy. A sign appeared on the side, weathered, bent, pointing toward a forgotten campground. Its paint was pale under the moonlight, flaking into shadow. Beneath it, something waited. A shadow, still, head tilted in a way that made the light bend oddly. I slowed the car. The tires whispered over wet asphalt. My breath felt thick. Every inhale pressed with cold. The shadow didn't move. Not a twitch, not a flicker of motion. I blinked, hoping it was a trick. Fog curling along the signposts, stretching shapes into illusions. But it stayed, silent, watching. The headlights traced its edges. A shape that felt human, but wrong, too stiff, too deliberate. I wanted to look away, but my eyes kept finding it, tilting, waiting. The air smelled of damp metal and soil. A rustling far off among the trees made my chest tighten. The road felt narrower, the fog heavier, as though pressing against the car. I thought of moving on, pressing the accelerator, but the shadow lingered, patient, silent. I tried to count it. Human? Animal? Something else? The shape refused clarity. The fog thickened. I could barely see the sign's letters now. The shadow remained, tilting its head, unmoving, watching. I swallowed hard. The car felt colder than the night itself. Every rustle in the trees sounded deliberate. I took a slow step on the gas. The tires whispered against asphalt, and the shadow did not move. I didn't glance again. I couldn't. The image lingered, pressed in my mind, sharper than reality. The road stretched ahead, pale and wet. The fog held the night close, damp and alive. Even now, years later, I remember the way it tilted its head. Silent, patient. The sign points to nowhere. The shadow waits beneath it, and the night hums quietly around both. The lakeshore was quiet. Mist drifted low over the water, curling along the reeds and rocks. The air smelled of wet wood and cold mud, sharp and heavy. I walked slowly along the edge. Tires had left no marks here, only my own footprints in damp sand. The hum of the lake was soft, almost imperceptible. Ashes lined the shore, black in circles where old fires had been. Cold now, dead, forgotten, except one, still warm, smoke curling faintly upward, twisting in the mist. I froze. The hum of the water felt louder. The damp air clung to my skin. Who had been here? Moments ago? Minutes? I couldn't tell. The warmth pressed against my fingers when I brushed the edge of the circle. The fog shifted. Rustling reeds whispered along the shoreline. The smell of wood smoke lingered, sweet and sharp. I leaned closer. The sand beneath my boots was cold and wet. The warmth of the ashes felt impossible, out of place. The lake reflected pale moonlight, silver across ripples, smooth and slow. The fire's warmth pressed against that stillness, strange and alive. I stepped back. The fog curled closer, damp and thick. The circle of ashes seemed too deliberate, too present. I thought about leaving. The night felt patient, watching, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. From a faint smoke rising, from the warmth still lingering in the cold circle. The air smelled of wet earth, wood, and something faintly metallic. A memory pressed against me, old and quiet. I could almost hear soft footsteps, distant, tentative. I crouched, tracing the edge of the ashes with my fingertips. Cold sand, warm ember. The contrast made my breath catch. The lake shimmered beneath the moon, smooth and endless. The fog pressed in tighter. I stood slowly. The warmth faded as I moved away, but the memory of it lingered. I walked along the shore, barefoot in the mist. Every rustle, every whisper fog felt deliberate. The lake stayed quiet. The old fire circles stayed black and cold. And one still carried a heartbeat. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel it. Someone or something had been here. And though the warmth faded, I knew the ashes would remember. Long after I left, the road stretched narrow and empty. Fog curled low, soft and damp along the asphalt. The air smelled of wet leaves and cold iron. I drove slowly, tires whispering against the wet pavement. Every breath felt heavier, each inhale pressing against my chest. Then I saw them, headlights in the rearview mirror. Steady, relentless, following. I blinked. The fog bent around them. They glowed pale, cold, like distant lanterns in the mist. I tried to ignore them, told myself it was another car, but the hum of the engine felt hollow. I pressed the accelerator slightly. The headlights stayed, unmoving behind me. I swerved to the shoulder, blinked, waiting for a car to pass. Nothing, only darkness and silence, the fog curling, pressing in closer. I exhaled, trying to calm my racing heart. Every rustle of leaves along the roadside sounded deliberate. Every shift in the fog made the light seem closer. I glanced again in the mirror. The headlights still there, steady, waiting, patient. I turned onto another stretch of road. Every curve, every shadow, nothing changed. The light mirrored me. Every movement, every hesitation. The air smelled damp, earthy, and faintly metallic. Cold pressed against my neck, my shoulders. The fog seemed thicker now, alive with presence. I tried to blink it away, told myself it was imagination, a trick of reflection. But when I swerved to let it pass, no vehicle appeared, only empty asphalt and fog. I pressed on, slowly, listening, breathing. The headlights never left, always behind, always following. I glanced again and the fog shifted. They seemed closer, as though the distance between me and them was shrinking. Every mile stretched longer. Every shadow on the roadside pressed tighter. The night hummed with silence. I could feel the weight of it in the air. Heavy, cold, relentless. Finally, I stopped at the next clearing, turned fully around. The road was empty. Only fog and the faint smell of wet leaves. No headlights. No engine hum. But the memory stayed. The light pressed against my mind. Relentless. Patient. Waiting. Even now, years later, I can feel it following. Just behind me. Always. The lake was still. Fog clung to the edges, soft and heavy, brushing the reeds and rocks. The air smelled of wet earth and cold water, thick and sharp. I walked slowly along the shore. The ground was damp beneath my boots. Every step whispered against the mud and fallen leaves. The water rippled, just faintly, in the still air, like breath moving beneath glass. Then I saw it, beneath the surface, pale and suspended, a human-shaped figure, perfectly still, watching upward. I froze. The fog pressed closer, damp against my skin. The hum of the night felt louder in the silence. Its eyes, I couldn't see clearly. Just a shape, pale and cold, drifting beneath the glassy water. Motionless, patient. I stepped closer. The air smelled sharper. Wet mud, reeds, and a faint metallic tang. The ripples shifted slightly, though the lake was still. The my breath caught. Every inhalation felt thick, heavy, pressing against my lungs. Every heartbeat echoed in the quiet. I tried to reason it out. Reflection, shadow, distortion of fog, and moonlight. But the shape didn't shift with the water or the wind. It stayed, watching, suspended in stillness. The reeds whispered with the breeze. The lake shimmered under pale moonlight, and the figure remained ghostly, suspended, alive in its stillness. I wanted to move away, to turn back towards solid ground, but my feet were rooted. The water pressed against the shore, cold and indifferent. The fog wrapped around me tighter, pressing damp against my shoulders. I could feel it then, not the shape itself, not even the water, but the awareness, the sensation of being observed, patient and unmoving. I stepped back slowly. Every movement felt heavy. Every rustle of leaves and reeds echoed in the silence. The lake remained calm. The figure stayed beneath the surface, pale, human-shaped, and impossible. I didn't look away. I couldn't. Even as the night hummed around me and the fog shifted, the shape remained, watching, suspended in glassy water. Finally, I turned and walked back. The cold pressed against my spine. The mud whispered beneath my boots. The lake stayed still. The fog stayed heavy. And the shape, it waited. Even now, I can feel it beneath the surface. Silent, patient, watching. The road stretched narrow and empty. Fog hugged the edges, soft and cold against the asphalt. The air smelled of wet leaves and damp earth, heavy in my lungs. I stepped forward. Footsteps pressed against the asphalt. But there was no echo. The silence pressed in. Every rustle of leaves sounded louder, sharper. Every breath felt thick, measured, slow. Then I heard it. A step, faint, slightly behind mine. Not my own. I froze. The fog curled closer, brushing my legs. The air smelled of damp metal and pine. I stepped again, and again the step followed, almost in sync. Almost, but not quite. I tried to convince myself it was imagination, a trick of timing, a shadow of sound. But the footsteps continued. Every movement mirrored, slightly delayed. Every step pressed against the stillness of the night. The fog thickened. Cold damp brushed my face and arms. The road seemed longer, stretching beyond vision. I stopped. The footsteps paused behind me. A heartbeat later, they continued. Soft, deliberate, patient. I walked slowly, each step measured. The echo that should have been never came. Only the shadow of another step, always just behind, always slightly out of sync. The air smelled sharper now. Wet leaves, cold asphalt, and something faintly metallic. The fog wrapped closer, almost alive. I turned my head. Nothing. Just mist and the stretch of road ahead. The shadowed steps followed anyway. My chest pressed tight. The hum of silence felt thick in my ears. Every breath loud in the emptiness. I tried to move faster. The steps behind did too. Every shift, every pause perfectly matched. Almost. The fog pressed against the asphalt. The night stretched. The road seemed endless. Finally, I stopped completely, held my breath. The footsteps paused. A long moment of stillness. Then a single step, soft, alone, suffocatingly close. I turned again. Nothing but fog. Nothing but the stretch of road. I took another step. The shadow followed. Patient, quiet, always slightly behind. The road never ended. The fog never lifted. And the footsteps, they always waited. Even now, years later, I can feel them behind me. Soft, deliberate, unyielding. Just out of sync. The road curved sharply. Fog clung low, curling around the trees and asphalt. The air smelled of wet wood and pine, heavy and cold. I drove slowly, leaning into the bend. Every tire whispered against the damp pavement. Breath felt thick, pressed into my chest with a chill. Then I saw it. A cabin, abandoned, crouched along the curve. Boarded windows, sagging roof, silent and still. But the light, a faint flicker behind the boards. Orange and uneven, like a candle swaying in windless night. I slowed. The fog pressed closer to the edges of the road. The smell of damp earth and rotting wood wrapped around the car. I blinked. The light flickered again. Soft, uneasy, alive. The cabin leaned into the night. Shadows pressed against the boards. I could almost hear the hum of silence inside. I wanted to keep driving, to look away, but the flicker drew me in, paralyzing curiosity. The leaves whispered, rustling along the roadside, gentle and deliberate. Every shadow along the cabin seemed to twist toward me. I stopped. The engine hummed softly. The fog pressed damp against the windows. Another flicker, brighter this time, as if someone or something moved inside. I pressed my hands to the wheel. The air smelled sharper now, with smoke and damp pine. A subtle warmth seemed to radiate from the cabin, impossible in the cold night. I stepped out slowly, boots pressing into wet leaves and mud, every footfall muted by the fog. The light flickered again, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a shadow behind the boards, a shape leaning, peering, deliberate. I wanted to call out, but my voice stuck, swallowed by the night. The silence pressed against me, thick and patient. I reached closer to the cabin. The boards were cold, rough against my fingers. The light inside pulsed, slow and uneven like a heartbeat. I stepped back. The fog wrapped tighter around the bend. The cabin leaned into the night, still and patient. The flicker faded. I turned toward the road. The tires whispered against the asphalt. The air pressed damp and heavy against my shoulders. I glanced back once. The cabin waited, silent, dark, and though the lights were gone, I could feel them lingering inside. Even now, years later, I can feel that cabin leaning into bend, watching, waiting, its flicker alive somewhere just beyond the boards. The road disappeared beneath a blanket of fog. Trees leaned close, shrouded in mist. The air smelled damp, earthy, sharp with cold. I walked slowly, each footstep pressed into wet leaves and soft mud. The silence held me, thick and heavy. Then I noticed it. The fog thickened around me, denser than it had any right to be. It wrapped tight against my shoulders, curling into my hair, into my breath. I paused. The world seemed smaller, narrowed to nothing but gray and pale light. Every sound was swallowed before it could reach me. And then, a whisper, soft, gentle, my name. I froze. The fog pressed closer. The air smelled colder, heavier, almost metallic. I whispered back. Nothing. Only silence responded. Only fog curling around me. Patient, deliberate. The whisper came again. Nearer this time. Or perhaps I had moved closer to it. The distinction didn't matter. I could feel it then. The fog wasn't just air. It was presence. Watching. Waiting. My breath caught. The damp clung to my skin, cold and wet. Every hair on my arms pricked with tension. I stepped forward. The fog shifted around me, soft and heavy. The whisper drifted closer, almost brushing my ear. I tried to convince myself. Breeze. Reflection. Imagination. But the fog answered, bending around me, curling into shapes I couldn't name. I stopped, closed my eyes briefly. The whisper lingered, patient, deliberate. Calling again gently my name, I opened my eyes. Gray everywhere. No shape, no source. only the heavy press of fog. I moved again, each step slow, measured. The whisper followed, echoing slightly behind, yet impossible to locate. The mist carried scents. Wet earth, cold water, faint smoke. Each inhalation pressed tight against my chest. The fog thickened even more. I could see nothing beyond a few feet. And yet, I felt its awareness pressing in. The whisper came once more. Soft, patient, shaken now, almost questioning. I tried to speak. Words caught in my throat. The fog swallowed my voice before it could leave. I stepped aside, hoped to move past it, but the whisper followed. Slow, deliberate, insistent. Finally, I stopped completely, held my breath. The fog swirled, curling around my boots, my hands, my shoulders. Silent, heavy, patient. And then, quiet. No whisper, only the damp press of fog. The gray. I moved on, careful, slow, listening for the return of my name. Even now, years later, I can feel it. The fog waiting. Patient, silent, calling softly, always just beyond reach. The highway stretched endless and dark. Fog clung low along the roadside. The air smelled faintly of asphalt and cold metal, damp with evening dew. I slowed as the station appeared. Empty, silent. Its pumps hummed faintly, a low vibration in the still night. The windows were dark. No movement inside. No light, but the pale reflection of the fog on glass. I stepped out of the car. Boots pressed into wet asphalt. The hum of the pumps pressed softly against the silence. Then I saw it. A shadow moved across the far wall. Slow, fluid, but no one was there. I froze. The cold pressed against my skin. Every inhalation felt thick, wet, and heavy. The fog drifted closer, rustling faintly along the curb. The smell of damp earth and oil pressed against my nose. I wanted to call out, but the silence swallowed my voice. The shadow had vanished the moment I blinked. I moved closer. Each step echoed faintly against the asphalt. The hum of the pumps grew warmer, more insistent. The air felt heavier. My hands brushed against the car, cold metal biting into my fingertips. Every instinct told me to leave, but the shadow lingered somewhere in the corner of my vision, always just beyond clarity. Patient, waiting. The fog curled around the station. The air smelled of wet concrete, oil, and something faintly metallic. The humming pressed against my ears. I circled the pump slowly. No one. Nothing. The shadow moved again, briefly, across the far wall. I stopped, heart pressing against my chest. The station remained still. The fog thick, close, and damp. I stepped back toward the car. The hum of the pumps followed, low and insistent. The shadow vanished once more, leaving only pale asphalt and fog. I climbed inside, door creaking softly. The engine hummed against the stillness. Breath damp on glass. Fog curling outside the windows. I drove slowly away. The station receded into the mist. The hum faded, but the unease stayed, pressing against my skin. Even now, years later, I can feel the station waiting. Silent, empty, its shadow lingering somewhere in the fog. The night was quiet. Fog curled low over the road, soft and damp. The air smelled of wet leaves and cold metal. I sat in the car. Headlights dimmed, engine humming softly. The world outside seemed pressed against the windows. Then I heard it. A knock. Soft. Barely there. I froze. The air felt heavier, damp pressing into my skin. Every leaf rustled with exaggerated clarity. Another knock. Softer, deliberate, echoing faintly in the stillness. I held my breath. The smell of wet asphalt filled the car. The fog pressed against the glass, pale and patient. It came again, this time louder, a hollow sound, pressing through the quiet like a slow heartbeat. I glanced around. The road stretched empty. No trees moved. No wind stirred the fog. Another knock. Closer. Louder. The metal roof beneath it seemed to shiver. I pressed my hands against the wheel. The hum of the engine mingled with the hollow rhythm. Each knock felt deliberate, almost aware. I wanted to leave, to step on the gas. But my body stayed, frozen by some slow, creeping dread. The knocks continued, soft and loud, building and receding, patient, deliberate. I tried to listen for their source. Nothing. Only the fog and the hum of the engine pressed close. The night stretched, thick and waiting. And then silence. Sudden, complete. The hollow rhythm vanished. I exhaled slowly. The air felt colder, heavier. The fog pressed tighter against the windshield. I glanced at the roof again. Empty, still, unmoving. I started the car. The engine hummed steadily, low and constant. Breath caught against the glass. Fog curling outside the windows. I drove slowly. Every shadow seemed to stretch just beyond the edges of light. Every rustle of leaves echoed in the silence. The knocks never returned. Yet I could still feel them, their hollow presence pressing, patient, insistent. Even now, years later, I can feel that rhythm beneath the metal, soft, hollow, watching, waiting. The road stretched narrow, bordered by mist and trees. Evening pressed heavy against the asphalt. The air smelled of wet pine and cold earth, thick and damp. I drove slowly. Every tire whispered against the wet road. The hum of the engine mingled with silence, patient and still. Then I noticed it. The signs along the roadside. They had changed. Arrows pointing places that shouldn't exist. Words rearranged, unfamiliar, yet almost familiar. The lake remained visible in every direction I turned. I blinked. The fog pressed closer, brushing damp against the windshield. The air smelled faintly of smoke and wet wood. I stopped, heart pressed tight against my chest. The signs didn't move, and yet they weren't the same as before. I stepped out, boots pressed into soft, damp leaves. Rustling followed every cautious movement. I circled the car slowly. The signs were deliberate, pointing into places that led nowhere. Yet the lake, always there, reflecting pale light. I touched one sign, cold metal, slick with fog. The words felt etched deeper than before. I turned again. The road twisted beneath the mist. Every direction seemed familiar and wrong. I tried to retrace my path. The signs rearranged themselves as I moved, always pointing, always shifting, patient. The fog pressed against my face. Every inhale tasted of wet asphalt and pine. The lake glimmered through the mist, impossible, constant. I stopped. The air hummed softly, pressing close. The signs held their positions for a moment, then shifted, subtle, deliberate. I want to call out, but my voice stuck, swallowed by the fog. Only the hum of quiet, the faint rustle of leaves, and the distant reflection of the lake. I moved again, slow, measured steps. The signs followed, changed. The lake visible in every impossible turn. The night stretched endlessly. Fog wrapped the road and the trees. Shadows leaned closer, pressed faintly against the mist. I turned back once more. Every sign pointed differently now. The lake, still there, calm and reflective. Watching, waiting. Even now, years later, I can feel it. The signs rearranging, patient and quiet. The lake always visible. The fog pressing, insistent, disorienting, waiting for me to follow. The road narrowed beneath fog and pale light. Evening pressed damp and cold against the windshield. The air smelled of wet asphalt, pine, and something faintly metallic. I drove slowly, engine humming low, tires whispering against the wet road. The world outside seemed smaller, pressed tight by mist. Then I noticed it. In the rear view mirror, a shadow, soft, shifting, impossible to place. A figure sitting in the back seat, watching. I blinked. Nothing. The seat was empty. The mist outside blurred into gray and pale light. Yet the mirror insisted it was still there. Soft, patient, waiting. I tried to glance around. Head turned slowly. Only the empty car interior met my eyes. The shadow remained. Reflected. Immovable. Watching. I swallowed. The damp air pressed into my chest. Every breath felt thick, metallic. I drove on. The tires whispered against asphalt. The hum of the engine felt louder, heavier, vibrating through my hands. The shadow shifted slightly. Or maybe I imagined it. It leaned closer, patient, deliberate. I dare not look away. Every turn of the wheel pressed fog closer against the windshield. Every passing tree seemed to lean inward. I tried to speak. Words caught in my throat. The car remained still. The shadow waited. My hands trembled on the wheel. The hum of tires and engine filled the car. Outside, fog curled along the road, heavy and wet. I risked a glance behind. Empty. Nothing moved. I looked back to the mirror. Still there. Patient. Shadowed. Watching. The road stretched endless. Fog pressed against every surface. The air smelled damp, metallic, thick with anticipation. I drove slowly. Every mile stretched. The shadow never left the mirror. Even now, years later, I can feel it. It's patience, it's silence. Waiting in the reflection. Watching from somewhere I cannot reach. The lake stretched quiet beneath fog and moonlight. Water smooth, glassy still. The air smelled of cold earth and damp reeds. I walked along the shore, boots pressed into wet sand. The mist clung low, brushing against my coat. Then I heard it. A bell, faint, distant. It rang once, soft, lingering, carried across the still water. I stopped. The wind shifted. The smell of wet wood and fog filled the air. No island, no dock, no source. Another chime, closer, but the lake remained empty. I took a careful step forward. Ripples pressed outward beneath my feet. The fog wrapped tighter around the trees. The bells rang again. Harmonious, impossible. Each tone floating closer, echoing, but never touching anything. I felt it in my chest. A vibration, soft and insistent. A hum beneath the cool night air. The water gleamed in pale moonlight, mist curling along the edge. The bells pressed closer still, yet no shape appeared. I tried to call out. My voice broke, swallowed by silence. The bells answered with another chime, rising, falling, impossible to trace. I moved slowly along the shore, every step pressing against fog and dew, boots wet, breath rising. The bells seemed to circle me. Light reflected on water in impossible patterns. The air smelled of cold stone and iron. I froze. The sound stopped for a moment, then rang again, soft, lingering, patient, watching. I turned in a circle. The lake remained empty, glassy, calm. No dock, no island, no bell. And yet, the ringing grew nearer, vibrating through the fog and my chest. Haunting, insistent, beautiful. I stepped back from the water. The fog pressed, damp and alive. The bells faded slowly, echoing into distance. Even now, years later, I can hear them, soft and possible, ringing across glassy water, waiting, patient and unseen. The road stretched long, narrow, bordered by fog and trees. Night pressed damp and cold against the asphalt. The smell of wet pine and earth clung to the air. I drove for hours. Tires whispered against wet pavement. The hum of the engine low, steady, comforting. At first, I thought I was lost, but the road seemed familiar, even as it twisted and curved. Shadows moved at the edges of fog, pale and indistinct. Then I saw it, the mile marker by the lakeside. Familiar, impossible. I blinked. The car rolled forward. The sign remained, unchanged. The shadows, they had shifted, closer this time, leaning just beyond the edge of the fog. I swallowed. The air felt thicker, every breath heavy with cold and damp, every tire whispering against asphalt. I tried to drive on, tried to leave, but the road doubled back, curved around itself, folding in on the same mile marker. The shadows moved closer, soft shapes among the mist, silent, patient, watching. I stepped on the brake. The fog pressed against the windshield. Pale light reflected across the lake. The air smelled faintly of metal and damp leaves. I turned my head. Nothing inside the car, only the reflection of shadows in the glass. The engine hummed low. The tires whispered. I moved forward again and arrived at the mile marker. Closer now, the shadows had shifted toward the road, their forms elongated, unnatural in the dim light. I drove slowly. Every turn brought me back. Every curve returned me to the same place. The fog wrapped tighter around the trees and road. The lake glimmered through mist. Still, calm, impossible. The shadows leaned nearer, patient, deliberate. I stopped. Silence pressed against the car. The hum of the engine sounded distant. The wind carried nothing but wet leaves and cold air. I looked around. The road behind, the road ahead, Both led here, to the mile marker. The shadows, they were closer than before. Soft forms among the mist. Watching, waiting. I could feel in my chest. A pressure, a weight, unrelenting. The mile marker, the lake, the shadows, all impossible. All patient. Even now, years later, I can feel the road fold beneath me. The mile marker waiting. The shadows moving closer. Silent, relentless, patient, watching. Fog clung to the lake that night. Cold, damp, heavy against my coat. The trees shivered in a wind that carried silence. I walked slowly along the shore, boots pressing into wet grass. The scent of earth and decay hung in the air. Then I saw them, pale faces drifting in the mist. Blurry, shifting, eyes fixed on me. I froze, breath shallow, fog rising around me. The air smelled faintly of wet wood and cold stone. Another step, and they moved closer, drifting like smoke, blending into the fog, yet always there. I blinked. The shapes remained, unblinking eyes, watching, patient. The lake mirrored pale light. Ripples shivered across the surface. But the faces, they were between me and the water. Soft forms pressed through the mist. I tried to speak. No sound came. The fog swallowed it. The air felt thick, almost pressing against my chest. A low hum rose in my ears. The faces turned subtly as I shifted. Closer. Impossible yet undeniable. I stepped backward. Grass wet beneath my feet. Mist curling around my ankles. Every movement met with their unblinking gaze. The fog swirled. Shadows of trees bent, twisted, but the faces remained. Pale, blurred, insistent. I turned my head slowly, hoping to lose them, but in the glassy reflection of the lake, I saw them still, watching, waiting. The mist thinned, ever so slightly. The shapes began to fade, edges softening, eyes still fixed, unwavering, until the fog grew light again. Silence pressed. The wind carried nothing. The lake lay still, empty, yet I could feel their gaze lingering. I walked on careful, slow, boots wet, breath heavy, the smell of damp earth lingering. Every rustle of leaves a reminder. Even as the fog lifted, even as the pale light returned to the water, I could sense them, watching from the edges. Patient, silent, and impossible to forget. The road was quiet. Fog hugged the edges of the car. Thick and still, even the trees seemed to hold their breath. I reached to roll down the passenger window. Cold metal under my fingers. The glass wouldn't budge. Locked. I tried again. Fingernails scraping. Small clicks echoing. Still nothing. The hum of the engine became louder in the silence. Then I noticed it. A shadowy handprint forming on the glass. Inside the car. Slowly, deliberately, as though pressed by something unseen. My breath caught. I leaned closer. Fog glass damp against my forehead. No one was there, but the handprint darkened, spreading, fingers curling slightly inward. The cold seeped into my skin, metal against my palms, the damp of the fog on my cheeks. I felt it more than saw it, a weight in the air, a presence that pressed close. I pressed my hand against the glass. The print did not mirror mine. Smudged edges, pale as frost. It seemed to move ever so slowly toward the center. My heartbeat thudded, thicker than the fog itself. Every rustle outside sounded like footsteps. The wind whispered, brushing against the locked doors. I dared to glance around the car. Seats empty. Rear view mirror reflected only me. Yet, in the glass, the handprint remained. Alive. Waiting. I leaned back. Cold sweat prickled my neck. The fog outside pressing closer, blending with shadows in the corners. The handprint darkened further, as if aware of my gaze. The lock rattled slightly. I froze, every nerve tight, every breath shallow. The print seemed to shift again, fingers stretching along the glass. I could feel its presence behind me, not touching, but close enough to chill the air. The hum of the engine vibrated against my ribs. Fog pressed the windows, soft and heavy. I whispered to myself. Nothing answered. The handprint lingered, waiting, slow, inevitable. Time stretched. The road disappeared behind a gray curtain. Silence pressed in from all sides, yet the shadowed print remained. Finally, it faded, edges blurred, fingers pulling back into nothing. The window still locked, stubborn and cold. I exhaled. Slowly, the fog rolled past the car, dissolving into darkness. Still, the weight in the air lingered. I could feel it even as I drove on, watching, waiting. The road stretched ahead, long and empty. Night had settled deep, thick and cold. Fog rolled low over the asphalt, curling around the tires. I reached for the headlights. A flick, a hum, then nothing. Darkness swallowed the road. No road markings. No trees. Only the faint rustle of wind through the fog. My pulse thumped, loud in the quiet. I drove on, inch by inch. The dashboard glow felt small, fragile. Outside, nothing. The blackness pressed against the glass, almost breathing. Every mile was endless. Shadows clung to the edges of the road, shifting in the corner of my vision. I blinked. They were gone. Then, for a heartbeat, I saw them. Tall, thin shapes just beyond the reach of the headlights. When I tried to focus, they melted into the fog. I pressed harder on the wheel. The tires hummed over the asphalt. Metal against asphalt. The smell of damp fog and cold leather filled the car. It was heavy, suffocating. Minutes or hours passed. Time blurred. The blackness held me, quiet, unyielding. A soft whisper of air across the windshield. A hum beneath the tires. Finally, the lights returned. A flicker first, then steady glow. The road reappeared, familiar and yet wrong. Shadows moved closer. Along the roadside, watching, tall shapes crouched, stretching their thin fingers toward the car. Closer than before. I tried to look away. The hum of the engine became unbearable. The fog pressed at the windows. Soft, wet fingers of mist brushing my face. I dared to glance in the mirror. Eyes, pale and unblinking, reflected in the black glass. Not mine. Watching. I drove on. The road curved like a question I couldn't answer. The shadows followed each bend, silent, patient, inevitable. Every mile forward felt like falling deeper. The fog thickened at the edges of the headlights. Static in the air, a pressure against my ears. The engine groaned under the weight of the dark. Then, slowly, inch by inch, the shadows drifted back. Still present, but distant. Watching, waiting. I exhaled, though it felt shallow. The lights hummed steadily now. The road returned to its shape, asphalt glistening in pale reflections. But I knew they hadn't left. Their eyes lingered in the corners. Their presence pressed lightly against the windows. A memory of cold, soft, crushing terror. I drove on, silent, alone. The fog thinning, the blackness shrinking behind me, yet still, they were there. The shoreline was quiet. Fog hung low over the lake, curling around the trees and rocks. A damp chill settled into my skin. I noticed the first cairn just beyond the roadside. Small stones stacked unevenly, pale against the dark soil. I leaned closer. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and cold water. I drove on. Another cairn appeared. Then another. Each one seemed deliberate, placed with care. Their shapes caught in the headlights, sharp and unnatural. The sound of tires over gravel was loud in the silence. Rustling water lapped the edge of the lake, soft, almost deliberate. I blinked. The cairns had multiplied. By the next bend, they were lining the roadside, rows of stones leading slowly into the water. Some stood tall, stacked higher than my hand. Others barely balanced, threatening to fall with the slightest touch. I slowed. The air felt heavier, breath visible, each exhale short and trembling. A faint hum seemed to vibrate beneath the tires. I couldn't tell if it came from the car, the lake, or the stones themselves. The fog thickened, curling around the stacks like fingers. Shadows between the cairns deepened. I reached for the window, but it fogged before my touch. The smell of damp moss and cold stone was sharp now, close enough to taste. I stopped the car. The road was empty. Only the cairns remained, stretching into the water, silent and patient. Their edges reflected pale light, glowing faintly in the mist. I stepped out. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes. Soft, deliberate. The hum grew, subtle, vibrating through my chest. I followed the line of stones toward the lake, each cairn perfectly stacked, leading further from the road. Water lapped closer, brushing my ankles. The air smelled faintly metallic. Something watched from the fog. I wanted to look away. The stone seemed to pulse, almost breathing. My own heartbeat felt loud, ragged, out of sync with the silence. I counted the stacks, more than I had seen before, each one positioned carefully, pointing inward toward the deep, still water. The fog moved with the lake, curling around each stone. I felt eyes on me, cold, unblinking. I spun back the road. No one, just the stacks, lining the edge like sentinels. I backed slowly to the car, the gravel muffled under the tires, soft footsteps echoing behind me that didn't belong to me. The hum lingered in my chest. Breath shallow wet against my lips. The cairns ended at the waterline, some partially submerged, pale shapes disappearing into the dark. The lake was still glassy, and yet the stacks seemed to grow closer every time I blinked. I slid into the car. Engine hummed, tires on gravel, fog curling around the headlights. The stones remained, patient and quiet, watching from ashore. I drove on. Behind me, I thought I saw them shift. Just a hint. But when I glanced in the mirror, the shoreline was empty. Only the fog remained, thick and unbroken, swallowing the cairn slowly. Yet I knew they were there, waiting, still building. A path of stone leading into the lake, silent, endless. The fog lay thick over the water's edge. Damp air pressed against my skin, heavy with the smell of cold mud and decaying leaves. Each breath came short, visible in the pale light of the overcast sky. I crouched closer to the lake. The surface was glassy, almost black. I saw myself, but it did not move with me. Not at first. It stared, pale and still, a shadow in the water that should have mirrored my every twitch. A soft rustle of reeds whispered nearby. The reflection raised a hand. Slowly, deliberately, it pointed deeper into the fog, toward where the lake vanished into gray nothingness. I froze. A chill ran along my spine, wet and cold, like the fog itself had pressed against my neck. The water rippled slightly, though the air was still. The reflection stayed upright, unblinking, pointing. I moved my hand. Nothing mirrored me. It held its gesture. The lake's surface seemed unnaturally calm, holding some quiet intent. A soft hum vibrated from beneath the water, low and steady. I could feel it in my chest. The fog thickened, curling around the shoreline, swallowing shapes in gray. Each ripple from my reflection sent a whisper of static across my vision. I stepped back, leaves crunching softly underfoot. The reflection leaned closer, tilting its head. I could see nothing in its eyes. No emotion, no recognition, just a pale insistence to follow. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet stone and algae. I blinked. The reflection had moved closer to the center of the water, though I had not stepped forward. Each motion felt deliberate, slow, almost sentient. I knelt again. My fingers brushed the edge of the lake. The cold bit at my skin. The reflection's hand remained raised, pointing. The fog seemed to thicken around it, isolating it from the rest of the world. I could hear faint splashes behind me, soft and irregular. I turned. Nothing. Only fog, stretching endlessly along the shore. The reflection remained, still guiding me deeper. I stepped back again, breath shallow. The surface quivered slightly, like water held its breath. The air felt thick, sticky, almost heavy enough to touch. I could smell the lake, sharp and metallic, as though something had surfaced just beneath. I swallowed, feeling the hum inside my chest grow. I wanted to look away, to run, but my eyes were drawn to it. The endless reflection, pale and insistent. It tilted its head. I could almost hear it breathing, a silent rhythm. The fog around it swirled in slow eddies. Every ripple in the lake seemed purposeful, echoing the motion of the hand that pointed. The wind carried a faint rustling, soft footsteps against the reeds. I dared not turn. I could feel eyes pressing from the fog, from nowhere and everywhere. The reflection in the water remained. It never wavered. I crouched lower, The cold water licked my fingers. My own reflection finally moved, but it was not mine. It mimicked nothing I did. It simply waited. The fog thickened further, swallowing the lake in gray silence. The reflection's hand trembled slightly, then steadied. It pointed deeper, beyond where I could see. I stepped back. The shoreline seemed to stretch farther than it had a moment ago. The hum in my chest grew. The air smelled sharper, damp and metallic. Every instinct screamed to leave, but the reflection remained. Pale, silent, patient, pointing toward the endless gray. I turned my gaze slowly away. The fog pressed closer, curling around my shoulders. The lake held a reflection, unmoving and inevitable. I could feel it waiting, and when I looked back, it was still there, still pointing, as though the lake itself had chosen me to follow. The road stretched endlessly ahead. Dark asphalt faded into shadows. No morning came. The lake beside me lay still, black and unchanged. Fog pressed in from the edges. Cold air settled against my face. Every breath left a faint mist that clung to the air. I could hear the soft hum of water lapping the shore, steady, endless. Shadows moved at the edge of my vision. They were silent, patient, always just beyond the reach of the dim headlights. I drove slowly. The road twisted, but it felt the same. Every mile was the same mile. Signs I passed had no meaning. Each shadow seemed closer than the last. The fog thickened. It curled like smoke across the tires, licking the edges of the car. The cold dampness smelled of wet earth and decay. The air felt heavy, pressing against my chest. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, skin slick with sweat. I blinked. The lake reflected nothing. No sky, no dawn, only black water stretching toward endless fog. And in its reflection, the shadows waited. I stepped lightly on the gas. The engine thrummed softly beneath me, a low vibration against the quiet. Yet the shadows kept pace. No footsteps, no sound, just presence. Always just there. The road turned sharply. Mist swirled around the tires, wrapping the car in silence. I wanted to look away, to run, but my eyes followed the edge of the lake. And there, the shadows paused, watching, waiting. I slowed. The hum of the tires on asphalt became rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the dark. Breath caught in my throat. The fog pressed against the windows, damp and cold. The shadows shifted with subtle intent, curling closer. Time felt wrong. Minutes stretched into hours. The sky remained black, unbroken. No stars, no light, just the road, the lake, the persistent dark. I opened the window slightly. The night pressed inside, carrying the sharp smell of wet stone and algae. The shadows lingered, mirrored in the glass. Silent, watching. Every mile marker past repeated itself. I had been here before, and the shadows, always, were closer now. Edges defined against nothing, just intent. I wanted to scream. Sound swallowed by the fog. I wanted to stop. The lake reflected nothing but black. The road continued endlessly, and still the shadows followed. The hum of the engine vibrated through my chest. I could feel in my bones. The air grew colder, thicker, sticky with something unseen. The shadows seemed to press against the car, leaning in silently. I blinked again. The fog shifted, revealing nothing. Yet everywhere I looked, the road, the lake, the darkness itself, all watched, waiting. I exhaled slowly, tasting the dampness of the night. The world had stopped. Time had stopped. Only the road and the lake and the shadows remained. I pressed forward. The car rolled over asphalt that felt endless. The fog swallowed every turn, every mile. The lake stayed by my side, always there, unchanging. The shadows moved with quiet intent, keeping pace, silent but present. I could feel them in the corners of my vision. The cold pressed against my skin, breath fogged in front of my face. The road stretched further into night, into nothing. Morning would not come. The lake would not change. The shadows would not stop. I was alone, and I would remain so. The world had become the road, the lake, and the shadows, and the night would not leave.